Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our sponsors, WFYI, Nuvo, Pam Fraser of Fraser Designs, who designs our awesome posters, and the Center for Inquiry Indiana, which videotapes this event for later viewing on our website. Special thanks to Larry Rubin and the Rubin Family Foundation, whose generosity makes this series possible. By the way, I picked up this fan at the We Are Women rally. Several of you attended at the Indiana State House, and I didn't know at the time it was going to be come in so handy because we were freezing that day trying to keep our hair from going wacko. The war on women is nothing new. The war on women and reproductive rights has been going on for over a century. What makes the war on women and reproductive rights news, even now in the 21st century, is that despite over 150 years of struggle, our reproductive rights are on the slippery slope. First, those who would deny women their reproductive rights came for late-term abortions, and that sounded somewhat reasonable. Then they imposed certain restrictions on abortions, and some people said, okay. Next, they came after all abortions, and now they're after our birth control. The ACLU of Indiana specializes in slippery slopes because there's always a principle at stake. That's why we defend, for example, the free speech rights of all people, even when we deplore the content of their speech. The Bill of Rights guarantees free speech. The slippery slope is why we defend the due process rights of the most defenseless in our society, the immigrants, the homeless, prisoners, and children. The Bill of Rights guarantees us due process. It's why the ACLU of Indiana has successfully litigated and is currently litigating on behalf of Planned Parenthood to preserve Hoosiers' access to basic health care services. It's why the ACLU is fighting personhood initiatives across the country that would criminalize many of the most common forms of contraception. There are a number of constitutional principles at stake in these fights. Two things I'd like to leave you with. Please put your name and email address on the bowl that's being passed around for our door prize, Woman in the 19th Century, widely regarded as the founding text of women's rights, the women's rights movement in the United States. So they knew something even way back then in 1845 when that was published. And also, please join or donate to the ACLU to help us preserve the constitutional rights of all Hoosiers. Thank you, and let's talk about contraception. Barbara? Barbara Lewis will be moderating this discussion. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Barbara Lewis, and I'm host of Sound Medicine, and we talk about research in medicine, and I'm so thrilled because I get to talk about politics and religion and all sorts of stuff today in 50 minutes. So I'm going to apologize right now if I have to interrupt because I really want a good conversation going if from you in the audience. But if I do have to kind of cut you off a little bit to make us finish up at 12:50, I will. So apologize in advance. So let's talk about contraception. It is a discussion that's in turn religious, political, it's about civil rights, it's about health, it's about socioeconomics. It has certainly been in the headlines. We're going to talk a little bit about the different headlines and the big issues that have come up in just the last few weeks. So let me get right to it and introduce our panel. First, State Senator Jean Breaux. Jean Breaux was appointed to the State Senate in December of 2006 to fulfill the unexpired term of her mother, Billie Breaux. She was appointed to serve as Executive Democratic Caucus Chair in 2008.
May I cut you off?
Yeah.
No, I'm just playing. You don't really have to read this whole bio thing.
Oh, okay. It's in the... You have them in front of you? Oh, okay. Well, then... Let's go.
Let's go. Do it.
Thank you. I like a woman who wants to get going. So let's start with what brought you here. What made you say, yes, I will be on this panel because I have this message about the issue of contraception, or I'm passionate about this one topic. So let's start with you, Lisa.
What made me say yes to this was because It's such an interesting topic to be brought up at this time. In 2012, to be having a conversation in this way about contraception is amazing to me. And as a military veteran and as a woman, I think it's important that the everyday woman speak up and have her voice heard. So it was important to me as just a regular everyday person. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, to make sure that our voices are heard and the everyday opinion is brought out there.
Okay.
First of all, Barbara, let me just say I listen to Sound Medicine, so it's nice to put a face with the voice that I hear on the radio on Saturdays. This issue is extremely important to me. I'm very passionate about it, primarily because it breaks my heart to see so many children who are born as a result of unplanned pregnancies who live short and extremely painful lives because they're being born to parents who themselves are children and are babies, and whose parents don't have the ability to raise them in a way that will ensure that they will grow to adulthood. And I think that is a problem that we have in this state, making sure that our children understand the role of being a good parent and have access to the quality contraceptives that will prevent them from becoming parents until the time is right for them to do so. And I think as a state, we have a responsibility in this matter. I think it's a responsibility that we fail. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, is why I'm so passionate about this issue. And that's why I was so excited to be invited to this panel discussion today.
Thank you. Betty?
Thanks. Great question. My first answer is that anytime the ACLU of Indiana comes knocking, because they're such an extraordinary force here in the state and such an extraordinary partnership for us, I don't know where we'd be without them. And so I just want to say thanks for being such good partners, and thanks for this opportunity, because anytime we have a chance to talk about birth control, I think we should. That's more important by the day because it is increasingly under attack, and I'm sure in this 50 minutes we'll get into that, but it's kind of stunning to me that it's nigh on to 50 years that we've enjoyed birth control being legal in this country. It's the Centers for Disease Control at the federal government level said very clearly that one of the 10 most important advancements in public health care policy in the entire last century was to make birth control available across the country. And here we are with personhood and other issues threatening the very legality of that. So it's time for us to wake up, and it's great that this is happening here today. Thanks.
Senator Simpson?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here. I came because a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously at my age it's not personal, but
You have granddaughters.
well, I'm getting to that. If you want to give my speech, go ahead. Sorry, boy. But I came because I believe that so many women in the nation and in Indiana, specifically or particularly young women, think that this is a hypothetical conversation, that it's not reality. Couldn't possibly be, could it? But the truth is that here in Indiana, there have been several attempts, as there have been across this nation, to change the definition of when life begins from the legal and medical definition to a definition of the fertilized egg is when life begins, which of course then would make many kinds of birth control, including birth control pills, by definition an abortion. Which would put those kinds of birth control and contraceptives out of the reach of women in Indiana. In addition, the attack on Planned Parenthood, which I think gets at the notion that people are attacking access to women's health care at the very basic level. And it's time for us to stand up as women, as men who care about women, and fight back.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And could you hear everybody? Should I move Lisa's mic a little closer? A little? Yeah. Less. Okay. All right, so Betty, you brought this up, so you get the first question here. For nearly 50 years, as you said, women have had access to oral contraceptives for family planning and disease prevention. Why are we talking about it today? I mean, what is behind the reason why we're talking about it in 2012?
That's a tough question, and it's hard to know what the answer is. One easy answer is that there's a kind of a patriarchal move. There's certainly a fundamentalist, more extreme move in terms of the impact of religion and religious thought on these issues. And so right here, right now, of course, we see the fight between the White House and Catholic leadership across the country regarding the health care reform, introduction of all the preventive products and services for reproductive health care. No question in this country at this point there's a conservative bent. In the case of Planned Parenthood across the country, we report every incidence of any kind of threatening behavior. And in the first year that Barack Obama was in the White House, we saw more than a 60% increase in the number of those incidents. And in the second year, they've now told us that it's a more than 40% increase on top of that first year. People are they're unhappy and they're fighting back against difference, quite frankly.
And this next question is for one of the state senators. What is it about contraception as a social issue that seems to be so attractive to some politicians?
Well, you're asking us to defend the indefensible, but
or explain.
I have been told by one of my colleagues in the Senate when I asked him that question that we're indeed after your birth control, because birth control, of course, is the ruination of society and the American family, and it leads to promiscuity. We all know that no one had sex before birth control.
To answer your first question, I hope I don't offend anyone with may seem like a blasphemous statement, but when I was in college, I had some AT&T stock, and I was reading the prospectus. This one particular evening, obviously I had nothing more interesting to do. And in this prospectus, there was a woman who had she had a huge share of AT&T stock. And she was making it known that unless AT&T divested itself of any of those organizations that support abortion services, that she was going to remove all of her stock and put it elsewhere. And her rationale, and this is all in black and white in a prospectus that I was reading, her rationale for this was that the white middle-class women were choosing to have an abortion, and minority women of either from the African American community or other minority communities around the country were not having abortions. And if we did not stop this trend of young middle-class white women from having abortions, there would be an imbalance in the racial makeup. And now this is about 30 years ago that I read this, and I will always remember, I thought, wow, so this whole thing isn't about abortions and about life, and it's about, and now, and that's just one, possible component. I also think there's a move to prevent women from, that there's a movement to take women back to the dark ages when we were, in the kitchen every evening instead of out earning an income and raising children instead of going to work, and so I think there's a movement in this nation that there's a competition between men and women, and men are actually, and again, this is just my personal opinion, men are intimidated by it and fearful of it, and so let's put birth control back as an issue and make sure that women stay home and get pregnant.
And members of your district are disproportionately affected by
Absolutely.
By what we do in public policy.
Absolutely. Because my district, although it's a very diverse district, a large percentage of them are moderate to low income individuals who need access to every health benefit that's available to them. So when we start putting caps on access to preventative services, it's my district that ends up having more babies born on Medicaid and more babies at the cost of their birth and their lifespan falls squarely on the shoulders of the taxpayers.
Okay. Well, let's take it from a real broad perspective and bring it down to the personal level. And Lisa, you are here on the panel. Among many areas of expertise that you have and opinions you have on this topic, at the root of it is your personal story. Would you share a little bit with the audience so they can get to know your situation better?
I am a United States Air Force veteran. I am a military sexual trauma veteran. Just to give a little plug today, they're doing something over at the VA for sexual trauma veterans display. But this was important to me because I used birth control for years, not as birth control, but really as pain management. Because of a condition that I suffered from after a sexual assault, birth control was something that I used daily to be able to control pain so that my menstrual cycles were not so unbearable and to be able to get through everyday life. I went through not only birth control pills, but Depo-Provera, something that's a little stronger. And then while active duty, went as far as taking a drug called Depo-Lupron to actually put my body into menopause so that I would be able to function on a daily basis without having to take narcotic pain medication. So at this point in time in 2012, having the discussion of the possibility of women not having access to contraception through their health benefits that they pay for out of their paycheck or through benefits that they've earned while active duty is it's astonishing to me, and it's embarrassing that we're having this conversation, but one of the reasons I believe that we're having this conversation is a divisive subject. People have very strong opinions on this subject. It brings about a personal feeling, but no one really wants to talk about those personal feelings in an open forum. No one wants to be labeled pro-choice. Everyone wants to believe that life is obviously the best choice, but that's what it should be, is it should be a choice for individuals. And I know I don't want to make decisions for my neighbor, and I most certainly don't want my neighbor making decisions for me, and that's why it was important.
How did you feel the U.S. military handled your situation after your rape?
Well, I am a Gulf War era veteran, so we're talking a different time frame. Things were different then than they are now. The military has a new program. It's a sexual assault response team. There's one on every military installation. So sexual assault and rape are handled differently in the military than they were when I went through the experience. One of the things I've always said is the military did not rape me. An individual did that. But what I have suffered from that point on is the treatment that I received while in the military. And things are much better now. There's a long way to go. But one of the most important things is that there is now an advocate on every base for that assault victim to have someone to guide them through the process rather than doing it on their own.
Okay, and Lisa, one last question. You said that the treatment affected your health and you're on disability. What was the treatment that...
At the time, the morning after pill was not approved by the FDA, and so the military gave you what was their version of the morning after pill in the emergency room, which was just a very high dose. It's the equivalent of the first, I believe, 8 pills of birth control packs, and you take a week's worth of those pills in 3 days. And basically what that does is it does exactly what the morning after pill does, is so that if there was some type of implantation would not be able to occur. And so after receiving the military's version of the morning after pill, that's something that stimulated some hormone imbalance in my body, and I suffer from a condition called endometriosis. I've had 4 surgeries, and then last year had to have my uterus removed. It's something that I live with on a daily basis of chronic pain, but it's something that it's important for women to speak out that contraception isn't just about birth control. There are many other reasons that women use contraception, and we shouldn't be denied access through our health plans.
Well, let's talk about, broaden the subject to this campaign that's going on until the 4th of July. The Roman Catholic bishops are in the midst of a national campaign for religious freedom leading up to 4th of July. It's part of the legal action that Notre Dame and other Catholic organizations have going against the Obama administration. They say the healthcare provisions requiring employers to provide workers birth control coverage violates their religious freedom. The Obama administration was willing to compromise, but the Roman Catholic leaders said time was running out, so they took legal action. And this is the latest battle over contraception rights in the U.S. So I would like to hear your insight or argument or understanding of the very question that they're asking is that does this, that the courts will be answering, does this violate religious freedom? Does what the Health and Human Services and the Obama administration is asking. Betty?
First, we have to see what the Supremes do with health care reform generally, and that
Right.
decision's anticipated by the end of June, I believe. And then we have, people are struggling with First Amendment rights and religious freedom and those kinds of things, and there's an argument that under no circumstance should a taxpayer have to support anything that in the healthcare arena that isn't consistent with their religious views. Spent some quality time last night with a very good friend, a Republican friend who's been in my life for a long time. He's a very staunch Catholic, and he believes there will be civil disobedience over this if it doesn't go away. And he's a little surprised that I think it's okay that the White House has taken the position that it did, given what he knows about my support for First Amendment rights. So it's a tough one. But we know that 99% of women in this country who've been sexually active have used contraception, and more importantly, 98% of the Catholic women. It's it's part of our lives, and it should be.
Okay. State Senator Breaux or Simpson? Anything on how you see it? I mean, is there some truth? Or is there something that you understand about this argument?
Well, I tend to see it from the employee's perspective. I think the president's compromise proposal allowed for churches and other religious institutions to protect their own conscience and their own beliefs. But in the case of for-profits or not-for-profits that are not religious-based, like universities and others, other employers, Sagamore Insurance, for instance, which I believe is a Catholic-owned insurance company, but a for-profit endeavor, as far as I know. It seems to me that if you hire people who are non-Catholic, that the employee who often doesn't have any say in the selection of the insurance coverage or the insurer ought to have some right to access medications of any kind that they need to stabilize or make their well-being better. And I think we need to stop thinking about contraceptives as different than other kinds of medications and other kinds of healthcare planning. It's in my mind, it's not much different from stabilizing a diabetes issue or other kinds of. I hate to take the easy one here and talk about Viagra, but so I won't. I think we make a mistake if we start separating birth control pills, for instance, or other kinds of contraceptives from other kinds of medication and medical procedures. So. I agree with Betty. It is a tough one, but I applaud the president for taking the position he's taken and trying to work through what is a very, landmine-filled pathway. I wish people would come to the table more often and have a real discussion. But I am concerned about employees who have no choice in their insurance coverage.
Well, let's talk about Sandra Fluck and her testimony in front of Congress and the resulting controversy. I mean, after Rush Limbaugh called her a slut, he and Bill O'Reilly, another conservative talk show host, repeatedly made this argument. Why should taxpayers have to foot the bill so women can be sexually active? Covering the cost of contraception is not like covering a medical condition that needs to be treated. I think, Senator Simpson, you touched on that. Let's start with you, Lisa. I'm sure you remember the controversy.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
What that brings up for me, and touching on the military aspect of this, is how will that affect our active duty military women? And not only our active duty women, but our active duty men. Contraception is something that the United States military provides for its active duty personnel. It's something that in the military you are not supposed to see a non-military physician. If you're active duty, especially if you're on mobility or if you're on flight status, you can't see a physician that's outside of the military. So in an election year with the White House and the control of Congress somewhat up for grabs, looking at legislation giving employers the ability to not cover birth control because it's against their religious beliefs makes me very worried about what might come in the future if our administration changes. What's going to happen to our active duty military women who depend on birth control to be able to continue their service in the military? What's going to happen? One of our active duty military men, they're not going to stand for this either because birth control is something that they use within their families to plan their families so that they continue to serve in our all-voluntary services. I think there's a bigger picture here that everyone is kind of glossing over.
And my thought is that abstinence as a single policy position simply isn't enough, and that we have to recognize that there are going to be those who, for whatever reason, want to participate in some kind of family planning method which would require the access to contraceptives, whether it's because they're sexually active, whether it's because they want to prolong the start of a family until the circumstances are more supportive of that decision. There are a number of reasons why, and it's not just so that a woman can be sexually promiscuous, and I think that is where clearly I would disagree with Rush Limbaugh and those of that ilk who think that this is all about sexual promiscuity. This is about preventing sexually transmitted diseases. This is about preventing unplanned pregnancies, about preventing putting too many children in the state's FSSA, Department of Child Services, because those children are born to families who are unable to take care of them. I mean, this access to contraceptives is such a huge, has such a huge impact on so many aspects of life that to just narrowly say that it's to prevent promiscuity is, just really kind of asinine.
Okay. I'd like to open it up for questions now. We've got plenty of other subjects to talk about, but while we're on these topics, if anybody has a question. Okay.
First of all, I love this panel. Really, it's a wonderful discussion. And Kelly knows about this question because she and I have chatted about it a little bit. I'm intrigued that the discussion it has a distinct lack of responsibility for male contraception and birth control as well. From my perspective, it's a shared responsibility. And it seems to me that very often our dialogue and discussion of this issue puts all the onus on women to take care of controlling conception. And I think that is a perhaps area that would need to be explored more. Any comments from anyone?
Well, I just want to say that I authored, somebody on the Republican side, and my memory may be a little rough on this, but somebody on the Republican side wanted to author some legislation that said if a woman gives birth to a baby who has drugs in their system, that woman has some kind of punitive response from the state or DCS or someone. And I authored an amendment that said that the father of that child should also bear the same consequences as the mother, because it takes two to put that egg and sperm together. And who's to say that the father
Visual
who's
aid.
to say that the father hasn't been, why is it the punitive responsibility placed on the woman when that father could just as easily have indulged in medications that are illegal as much as the mother? But the presumption is always it's the mother's fault. The presumption is always it's the woman's fault. And you're absolutely right. That needs to be broadened and to include the other half of that as well.
And on a similar,
That bill, as a result of that amendment, by the way, they pulled it.
really?
I'm done, yes.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's okay. Well, when, and that's, along this point, and I'm bringing up Viagra again. When Viagra and its equivalents first came on the market, they were almost universally included in insurance plans. I mean, there wasn't much discussion. Just back to the same question, I guess, of why we're still talking about women's reproductive rights in contraception.
Well, and apparently we know that there are incidents still all over the country where women show up at a pharmacist window to get emergency contraception, birth control, whatever, and in some cases the pharmacist will ask to see proof that she's married. I've never heard of any incident where a person filling a prescription for Viagra, which I think would limit to the 49% of the population that's male. Never heard of an incident where they were asked to show proof of marriage before they could get their little blue pill.
Lisa.
I wanted to thank you for bringing up that question and making that point. And I think this is a topic of discussion that has been going on since the beginning of time between responsibility between men and women. And I see the audience here. There are quite a few men here, but the majority are women. We all know that when it comes to children and responsibility, it always seems to fall in the responsibility of women. But the people who are having this conversation and somewhat stirring the pot on this controversy, they're mainly men. And I think if more women stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, let's talk about Viagra. Let's talk about the fact that this can be handed out almost like candy, and we see men using this medication. Why is it okay and all right with your religious beliefs that a man can take a pill to be able to perform sexually, but women shouldn't be able to be provided a pill so that they can perform sexually and not have the consequences that men don't have to worry about?
Excellent point. Okay, go ahead. And then you, back. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. On the subject of men and women, we're starting to talk about gender. I'd also like to ask if a white middle-class woman designed the graphic to go along with this very program. I think it's a really curious thing when we look at gender issues in our society, that it's insidious, and sometimes we don't even consider some of the things that we're espousing ourselves as women or men as actors in society. If we break that down, I look at the woman that's on our flyers. She looks old, ugly, sexless, mean. She's about to hit us all with a ruler. But we're asking the question, have we returned to the 19th century? I think that implies a control over women from the past, that we're returning to a time when men or government had more control over women, yet we're showing an empowered, mean, ugly, sexless woman as the figure on the graphic. And I just think it's a really interesting rhetorical choice that we made, and many of us maybe didn't even notice, because we suffer from that same syndrome. When somebody's even talking to you about their doctor, sometimes we say, oh, what's his name? And we forget, well, a doctor might be a woman or a man, but thank you.
She is ugly.
I guess I didn't even really see it, and that's what exactly it kind of speaks to, doesn't it? That it's that we see it and we think, oh, that's kind of a cute character, and I think she's cute. I don't know.
Could I just make a quick comment? I think it was Shirley Chisholm who said, Congresswoman who ran for president, many of you my age will remember, and I think it was Shirley who said that She's a black woman, but had experienced much greater discrimination because of the pervasiveness of sexism in the society, because she is a woman than because she is an African American. It's still there.
And
Ask Hillary Clinton.
We have a question in the back here. Here, grab the microphone, please.
I heard recently that there was a great piece of legislation that was introduced in the Plains by a wonderful Democratic congresswoman. I don't know, I think it was on the state level, that basically outlawed masturbation because it was killing sperm. And that she introduced it with the point of trying to put
Write that down, Jean.
sperm on the same playing field as the woman's egg. And they subsequently interviewed some of the male congressmen, and they were horrified by it. I was wondering if there's ever been anything introduced on a national level to try to do this in different state legislations, just to get people's attention of the inequity of how the men and the women are treated differently.
That is a great piece of legislation.
We found an Indiana sponsor.
It will probably not get a committee hearing, but I think I might try to draft something like that.
Well, it was really heartening when it happened, and back again to personhood movement, and this egg and this sperm connecting creates a fertilized egg, and that then becomes a life that they would argue should have all of the same rights, protections, whatever, that the rest of us do, in spite of the fact that that does not yet cause a pregnancy, because it has to implant in the uterine wall. And if part of that's about abortion and attacking abortion, you can't have an abortion without a pregnancy. And so there's a fundamental flaw in what they try to argue with that anyway. But the state level legislator, she did pretty much have it was very succinct. It pretty much said that men were not allowed to leave their sperm anywhere but in a vagina, because otherwise it would be murder, pretty much what she said.
So we've been talking about personhood, and I'm sure everybody here probably knows what we're talking about specifically, but let me give you just a tiny bit. This all goes back to Roe versus Wade. In Roe versus Wade, the state of Texas argued that, quote, the fetus is a person within the language and meaning of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court responded in its majority opinion that if the suggestion of personhood is established, the appellant's case, of course, collapses, for the fetus's right to life would then be guaranteed specifically by the 14th Amendment. So that's what we're talking about there. Betty, you've been touching on this subject, so let me start with you on this question. Do you think that this movement around personhood has any real traction, or is this something that you're really paying attention to in Planned Parenthood?
We are paying attention to it every waking hour of every day. It's been defeated twice already in Colorado in referenda at huge cost. And the most remarkable one was when the Supreme Court in Mississippi last September ruled that the referendum vote could take place in November on Election Day. And we all joined forces across the country and sent money and did phone banks and did all kinds of things as foot soldiers to try to defeat the personhood amendment in Mississippi. And in 10 days, turned it around by 51 points. The pollster said that he'd never seen anything like it. So that's the heartening thing. But what everybody needs to understand is it won't go away. And the distraction and the resources that are invested to keep it from happening are extraordinary, and their resources very poorly spent when so many other needs are unmet.
And Senator Simpson, Senator Breaux, are you seeing kind of a momentum around the issue of personhood at the State House?
I have not seen anything in writing about a personhood proposal in Indiana. However, I think we're knocking on the door when we start talking about when life begins, changing the definition of when life begins. Even though the definition change would only be in the abortion statutes and not apply in other places of the code. I think we're truly knocking on the door. And it would not surprise me at all to see it come up in the future. Of course, we don't have referendum to fight in Indiana. What we have is a majority, one-party control of the House and the Senate. And if we keep that in the governor's office, then we'll have it.
I agree with that.
We have a question here and then a question here. Keeping the microphone.
Hi, I'm Trish Whitcomb with the Indiana Federation of Democratic Women, and I have a comment more than a question. Our friends at Planned Parenthood and our friends at the 51% Club and our friends at NOW have participated in putting together a statewide survey of women's issues. We will be announcing the results of that survey on Saturday, June 16th at about 1:30, and it will be available to you to participate in that by webinar. If you want to email me at trish@ifdw.org, we'll get you the information that you need to access that webinar. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the support for our issues is on a statewide basis. Thank you very much.
Getting the mic right over here. White shirt.
Hi, my name is Kimberly. And I think one person on the panel mentioned earlier that we don't tend to talk about this in personal terms. It all seems to be intellectual to a certain extent when we talk about this, which is, appropriate in most situations. But my question here is, and somebody else stated, that sex is a very personal issue, and reproductive rights are very personal issues. There's a lot of emotion that goes into this. So my question is why don't we actually talk about the stories like Lisa's story more, about people who have been victims of the system, and use that as a catalyst to, point out how the laws should change? Because if people are affected more by emotion, then that seems to be, the way that you should go. When I was in college, a friend of mine knocked on my door in the middle of the night, and she had been raped. And she asked me to take her to the infirmary at school. And I took her to the infirmary. She dropped out of school within a week. Her life totally changed. Now, I wonder how some of these conservative and Democrat and religious people who are firmly against, some of these issues about the morning after pill and all this would feel if we talked about how would it be if it was your daughter? How would it be if it was your granddaughter? How would you feel about this? And I never hear any discussion about this, hardly ever. In fact, the things I've seen is people refusing to answer the question, when they are confronted by television journalists, So, I think, to me, since it's such an emotional issue, maybe we should approach it from a more emotional way.
Well, and that reminds me of the Sandra Fluck case. I mean, what's the cost of standing out and saying something?
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up, because there's no question that the other side is threatening and aggressive, and you have every risk of introducing into your life some ugliness that you couldn't even begin to contemplate.
Right.
And so they may be brave and they may wish to be a voice, but for themselves and or their family members, they may decide that they don't want to introduce that into their lives.
And I was thinking there's a fine line, I think, that you would have to really try to navigate in making it more public, your personal stories more public, because the other side will hit that as Rush Limbaugh did with the young lady who testified, and instead of empathizing or sympathizing with that situation would find some way of calling you whiny or trying to use emotionalism to get your, it would be, we would have to do it in a concerted way so that we have like a movement or momentum where there is a group or something, as opposed to individuals just coming out and telling their stories.
I'm just throwing out suggestions here.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
I totally agree with you. I believe there would be a tax on people, on individuals.
Okay.
But I know there are brave individuals who can withstand that sort of attack.
And here comes the dreaded interruption. Thank you. Your question was absolutely wonderful. I want to give Lisa a chance to speak and also.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
Your point is exactly right. We need to be talking about this on an individual basis and talking about our personal experiences. Using the Rush Limbaugh example, you do put yourself at a very high risk when you talk about your own personal experiences. But I believe it's something that we need to do, not necessarily in our communities, but within our own families. I have aunts and cousins and sisters and brothers and uncles that I need to talk about my experience with them so that they understand it, so that they can continue to have those conversations outside of their home. Military sexual trauma is the Department of Defense and the VA's cowardly way of saying rape survivor from friendly fire. No one wants to use that word because it brings with it all the ugliness that rape brings with it. But we need to be able to face that ugliness and be able to move past it, because if you don't face the problems and try and sweep them under the rug, they're going to come back out. You can't keep them in the closet, and that's what I think we're doing as a society, is we don't want to talk about topics that make people uncomfortable, and that's what we need to do, but we need to do it with an open mind. I may not change your mind of your views on contraception, and you may not change mine, but we can at least respect each other's opinions and hear those opinions so that we have an open conversation.
I want to agree wholeheartedly with what Lisa just said. We tend to talk to ourselves or to each other. We love to talk to people who agree with us. It's much tougher to talk to people or with people who disagree. It's even hard, and believe me, I do it every day, to be tolerant of people who disagree. But we need to do it. We need to have these discussions, not just with ICLU members and Planned Parenthood supporters and with Jean Breaux and Vi Simpson, but with people who disagree with us, and try to get at the base of where these ideas and feelings are coming from. And there are a lot of talking points because contraception has so many fiscal ramifications, educational opportunities for women and career paths for women, and so many other things that come to mind that are really financial. And so for those people who aren't moved by the fact that I think I should be able to make choices for myself and for my own health care, perhaps they're moved by the fact that 48% of the children born in Indiana we're paying for as taxpayers. Maybe they'll be moved by that. Or the fact that we've paid $3.6 billion over the last few years to 14 pregnancies in Indiana. Maybe they'll be moved by that. So there are talking points that we need to be more aware of, and we need to get better at talking outside of our circles where our own opinions are reinforced.
Good point. We have a question.
Hi, thank you. One thing that frustrates me when we talk about birth control is that in the media and a lot of this discussion only has to do with the medical benefits of birth control, helping pain, helping the menstrual cycle, but we tend to shy away from talking about females who have sex, for pleasure. When we talk about Viagra, we accept it as a healthy part of a man's lifestyle, but we can't talk about that with women or without using terms like promiscuous and slutty. Why can't we talk about women who use birth control just for sex, for pleasure, to have a healthy part of life? And what does that say about our society and patriarchy and how it's still there? Any comments about that?
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah, this.
That's a great question.
There's
And
another-
I don't have an answer
You
at
know,
all.
okay, the woman in pink back there, come get the microphone. Yeah, good point. Good, a lot. Well, good points here today.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I'm just curious as to why we aren't talking about this more from a money standpoint. States with budget problems. I know that in 2008 there were roughly 800,000 children in foster care, and roughly 700,000 abortions performed. Now, not saying that all of those children would go into the foster system, but why aren't we talking about it from a financial standpoint, at least for state governments who are struggling? With 1.5 million children that could potentially become in foster care.
Yeah, what is the economic impact?
Right, right.
And I think that's what Senator Simpson was just alluding to, and it's certainly something that I believe as a state we have gone the wrong direction on this. And I think that is, if there's any chance of cooler heads prevailing in this topic, I think if we can get to people like a Senator Kinley or some of the more rational ones and just put the dollars and cents out there of how much this cost our state. Not only does it cost families and does it cost children, but it costs our state. And if you don't have any concern for the other two, at least be fiscally concerned at what we could save if we put some family planning. We have the ability to get birth control provided for women who have given birth on Medicaid for 2 years after they've given birth, as a way of preventing them from having a future birth, and many of whom have already said that they don't want to get pregnant again, that their preference is not to be pregnant, and many of them will tell you that their preference was not to get pregnant initially. And we've had this edict on the books for at least 5 years.
2005.
2005, and we as a state have not mandated that go through CMS to Medicare to get that on. I don't know what do we need to do?
We need to amend our Medicaid plan, and the administration refused to do it for 5 years after the statute was passed. I know because I was the author of it.
It seems to me that from the Republican side, speaking of budget and all this money that we're spending, why aren't they thinking about it in the long term?
That's the only chance that we have. If we can get people to recognize just how much it cost us as a state to not have this family planning waiver attached to our Medicaid program, how much it cost as a state to not provide access to birth control when you look at the number of babies that are born under Medicaid, how much it cost us as a state to do all of those things, that I think that we could try to make some movement forward in this issue. But nobody talks dollars and cents. It's all emotionalism. It's all based on their ideologies. And I think that's where we need to start talking about what it costs as a state.
But we also have the Daniels administration saying that they can't afford to implement because on the front end, you're beginning to supply some tens of thousands of Medicaid-covered birth mothers birth control for 2 years instead of for 6 weeks. And we overlook the long-term fiscal implications that for every dollar you spend in family planning, you save $4. But short-term, politics is pretty short-term these days.
We have time for maybe let's wrap things up. Because it's exactly the time to do it. Final thoughts, either a call to action for us or something that we didn't talk about, a point that you wanted to make. That now is your time.
Well, I want to add on to the fiscal issue, because in the bigger picture, I mean, we can provide all the facts and figures about why contraceptives, particularly contraceptives for poor women, are a cost savings for the state and for the nation. But in the bigger picture, think about, for those of us who are old enough to remember when before birth control pills were available, particularly for single women, you had to be married and have your husband's permission when they did become available. And for those of us who remember that, always at risk were educational opportunities, for instance. Unplanned pregnancy could interrupt your education. An unplanned pregnancy, because employers assumed that you would probably quit to have a baby or be gone on maternity leave or whatever, They made assumptions about that, and often it did happen that way because contraceptives were not available, and so career paths were closed. The door to breaking the glass ceiling was closed to women for many, many years because they had the responsibility of child rearing and childbearing, and birth control has made a huge difference economically for women. Has changed the lives of women in so many incredible ways, and to me, this is the issue of the next decade. We must engage young women, particularly in this conversation, because they assume that birth control will always be available to them, because they don't remember when it wasn't. And we must have these conversations on a regular basis with people, because it has changed the lives of women all over this nation and around the world in so many positive ways. This is really an important issue, and I thank ICLU for sponsoring this today.
Anything else? All right, well, please help me thank our wonderful panelists today. And thank you for coming and your wonderful questions and comments. It's been great.
I don't think I can.
Barbara, thank you so much. And now we'll do the drawing.
Yes, there you go.
I'll get Frank to pick it.
I need a dresser. I need someone to dress me. What are we doing? Oh, we're drawing something. Oh, for the book.
So the winner of Woman in the 19th Century by Margaret Fuller, published in 1845, is Mary Hunt. Congratulations. Thank you, everyone, for coming.